After our original V-Strom project bike got stolen, all of the companies that helped us build that first bike stepped up and helped us build another one. Welcome back to the V-Strom project bike. Our original plan with the V-Strom project bike was a three-parter. Originally, we wanted to do some testing on the bike, make a few simple changes, do some more testing, come to a conclusion with it, and then take it on an adventure for a week long to the south of France. Now, because our original bike got stolen, we weren't able to do that. That plan had to be shelved, and we ended up going through the whole motion of building the bike, testing the bike and riding it and using it for lots of things, but we never got to ride that adventure. However, we did all the testing we needed to do and we're happy with the end result. But first, let's roll it back and look at what the original bike was. At the end of episode 1, we'd made a few changes to the bike. When we moved into doing the testing for episode 2, just before that bike was stolen, we kind of figured out a few things that we needed to change again. But fundamentally, all the changes we made in episode 1 were about getting the riding position right, adding some protection that the V-Strom was missing, and adding some tires that were a bit more fit for purpose. That started by changing the handlebars and changing the foot pegs and moving them into positions where it allowed you to stand up and control the bike a little bit better. From there, we also added some protection parts from Outback Motortech, so that was some crash bars and a sump guard, and we matched it up with a Metzeler Karoo 3 tire. With the handlebars, our choice was to go with Fast Company's Flex Bar. The reason we chose that handlebar was because we wanted something that would add a bit more give to the bike, give us a really straight handlebar, and give us options to do things like add GPSs if we wanted to, and potentially remove a lot of the vibration that the standard handlebars solve by having huge bar weights and being kind of cumbersome. The initial bar we went with was the 15-degree sweep bar, and this was by far the biggest mistake we made. One of the tiny things that came out of our original bike getting taken away from us was that we were able to go back and make that change. And the change we went for was the 19-degree adventure bar that Fast make. Now, the big difference between the 15 and the 19 when it came to a V-Strom 650 is something that we overlooked a little bit, is that the reach when you're sat down on the V-Strom is really long. The tank is long, and so the front edge of the seat is a long way away from the handlebars. And when you had a really straight dirt bike style bar on the bike, kind of made it hard and uncomfortable to ride on the road. You were really stretched out. Even for me at 6'2", I wasn't able to reach the handlebars comfortably, and it didn't make riding on the road that enjoyable. Off-road, it felt amazing, but like all adventure bikes, you want that compromise to still be sweet. On the foot peg front, we use Suzuki's adventure style foot peg. They've got a collapsing middle, so the rubber squishes out of the way when you stand on them, and they're height and back and forwards adjustable. Having that freedom meant we could open the bike up a little bit more. So we had some small bar risers to fit the fat bar style handlebars of the flex bars, and the pegs were dropped lower, so it meant we were able to make the riding position a lot more comfortable and a lot more off-road friendly. After we'd rebuilt the bike, we set about testing. We pushed the bike's limits way beyond its comfort zone. We pushed it beyond our own comfort zones. We rode some really tricky off-road on it. We rode lots of road miles, highway, street, back tiny country lanes, and we learned a lot about the bike really quickly. And one of the biggest surprises was how much those small changes made a huge difference to what the V-Strom was capable of. To be honest, we ruined the handling on the road straight out the box. One of the V-Strom's biggest highlights as a bike is that it's a really lovely street bike. It's very easy to ride, it's effortless, and it gives you a lot of confidence. And all of those things were gone. I think the biggest thing is that the balance on the V-Strom is a little bit off in stock trim, but because it's on road tires and it's kind of well set up in terms of the control of the suspension, it hides it a tiny bit. It's not a big noticeable characteristic. You can definitely just throw the bike around and it gets on with it. When it came to changing the tires, there's a characteristic to off-road tires, adventure style tires, especially ones with the more off-road styling, that they fold into corners a little bit more. So as you get to the gap between the outer knobs and the inner knobs, have a slight tendency to roll over a little bit quicker. And on the V-Strom, that became a really poor handling characteristic. That was combined with the fact that it seemed to lose a lot of feel from the front end. The balance was really clearly off between the front suspension and the rear suspension. This started to become apparent when I was trying to solve this problem. I added some preload to the rear shock and the bike felt better, so I kept adding preload. And I added preload all the way up until we ran out of preload adjustment and the bike felt the best it had felt the whole time we'd had it. So the way to solve that is to bring some balance back by putting the forks through the triple clamps a bit more. We did that 3mm in the end, which is quite a lot. And that 3mm adjustment meant that I could come back on the preload on the shock. And when we added luggage and we added weight, it was going to be better. And the end result was that the V-Strom got its great handling characteristics back. It felt good on the road. It turned in nicely and consistently. The front wheel feeling came back a little bit, and generally it was back to the good old V-Strom that we love. Off-road was a different story. Generally, the V-Strom 650's problems when it comes to riding off-road as a stock bike are that the foot pegs are rubber and cast aluminium, and they're really high in relation to everything else. That means they're slippery when wet, slippery when dry, and they put your center of gravity a little bit too high in relation to the bike. On top of that, handlebars are taken off a penny farthing. They've got so much sweep on them that it's unreasonable, and when it comes to riding off-road, it's super counterproductive for being in a good riding position. Fixing those two things, even in the car park, made a huge difference to how well the V-Strom performed. It just felt dramatically better. It was easy to stand up on, it was easy to balance and control and make the bike do much more of what you wanted to do, but things weren't perfect. Firstly, the foot pegs, as much as I like them and I like the idea behind them, in British riding conditions, we have a lot of water. The teeth on them are really rounded, and when they got wet, they were a liability. Feet came off foot pegs all the time. And while I think they're fine for general use riding, if you're planning on doing a lot of off-road and it's gonna rain, they're no good. On the flip side, the handlebars, however, are incredible. Firstly, they're much better for riding off-road because they're straighter and they're in a really good position. We paired them with an adapter, and that also added a little bit of rise to the handlebar, which really helped with the riding position. It opened everything up a lot more. But really what makes the flex handlebar so good, especially on this bike, is that built-in flex. It takes away a huge amount of the vibration because of the polymers in the handlebar, and it takes away a huge amount of the small, harsh impacts that get transmitted for a solid triple clamp. Think of them like super duper rubber mounted handlebars. They're just a lovely product, they work really well, and they're really beautifully made. For a more relaxed ride and something that's just a bit more general all-purpose adventure bike riding, the 19-degree sweep that we've got on the V-Strom is definitely the way to go. If you have a bike that has a reach shorter than the Titanic, you might be able to go with something straighter and go for a more typical off-roady style feel on your adventure bike. But on the V-Strom, it didn't work, and we were super happy with the 19s. I started the next phase of this project bike with some new parts. That was a new gear lever and new foot pegs from SW Motec. Sadly, it seems impossible to find a brake pedal for the V-Strom other than the stock one. SW Motec make a fantastic gear lever for this bike. It's adjustable, it's got a folding tip, it fits up perfectly and replaces the stock unit. There's not much more I want from a product like this other than to look good and solve a problem, and it does both of those. On the foot peg front, SW Motec have got a proprietary, interesting design of adjustable foot peg. It's got this kind of weird cam system where as you move it round, you can move it backwards or forwards, up or down in a million different configurations. It's quite complicated, but also incredibly simple. And I really like the idea. We were still able to run the foot peg in a drop position, and especially when we took the stock rubbers out, it had quite a lot lower foot peg than the standard bike and kept the riding position really good. They mounted up relatively easy, they're sturdy, cast aluminium product, they do the job really well. The teeth are a little bit sharper than the one we had, but my main complaint with it is that I don't really like rubbers that bolt in and out of foot pegs. I understand people's desire for security with it, but when a foot peg bolts in and out all the time, I just end up not changing it. What is an adventure bike without the ability to take some pants, a tent, and some flip-flops away with you? If you can't carry stuff on your bike, it's a bit pointless trying to go camping with it. And so panniers were a really, really big part of the equation. When it comes to choosing panniers, I think there's probably 1,000 options out there for different bikes that come in all shapes and sizes, aluminium ones, soft ones, pannier rails, no pannier rails. But when it came to choosing panniers, we had a few criteria I wanted to meet to make sure that the V-Strom stayed in the same direction we were going with it. Firstly, they needed to be budget friendly. Secondly, I wanted them soft and I wanted them out of the way. And when it came to panniers, I didn't really want to be putting pannier rails on my bike. Adding more weight to it, adding more cost to it wasn't something we were excited to do. And so that narrowed our options down quite a lot. And the conclusion we came to testing was the Endurostan Monsoon 3 panniers and the Tornado top bag. They work as a set. They strap on using Velcro and rock straps, and overall, I think it's a really nice design. It's not perfect, there's definitely some limitations, but some of the things that the Monsoon did really well when paired with the V-Strom were things that aren't necessarily advertisable features. The first one is that they're really out of the way. They sit a long way back on the bike, and because they sit a long way back on the bike, you never ever notice they're there when you're riding. Even when you're going down steep hills and you have to stick your bum back a long way, they feel like they're completely out of the way. There are some limitations, however. They're not the best panniers when it comes to taking them on and off all the time because they connect together to sit on the bike. It can be a bit fiddly when they're full of stuff. When it came to fitting them up the first time, it was a little bit tricky to figure it out, but I followed the instructions and they went together in about half an hour. And each time since then, it has got quicker and quicker, obviously, as you learn to use them. But I don't think they're the kind of panniers that you're going to use if you're taking stuff in and out of hotel rooms every night and so on. That's a limitation. Unless, of course, you have inner bags, and then I would take the inner bag out, roll them back up and take the top bag in with me. I think where these panniers probably work best are if you're living next to your bike for a few days at a time, a week at a time. They're fantastic. And they're good for this as well because they're light, they pack down again, and they can go away in storage and it not be a big issue. Point, I'd done a fair few miles on the V-Strom and I was generally really happy with it as a bike. You can't ride the V-Strom very quickly without it getting squirrely. The small front wheel, the weight balance, the chassis, the geometry, and the suspension all add up to a bike that just has a lower limit than some other bikes when it comes to riding off-road. It doesn't have great feel from the front end, it likes to push the front wheel quite a lot, and generally is just a bike that you need to respect when riding it off-road. Because of that, when it comes to off-road riding, the suspension isn't the limiting factor. When we talk about suspension, it's something that I deliberated over a lot, and a huge amount of people after the first episode asked about it in the comments. As I was testing this bike, I was going through in my head what I wanted to change and where I was going to take the suspension. And the more I thought about it and the more I went through the pros and cons of what I could do and what I couldn't do, I came to the conclusion that changing the suspension on the V-Strom within a budget is probably not going to fundamentally change what this bike is capable of. You see, with the V-Strom, the main problem comes from the fork and the shock being designed for road use, but also having very limited control. We don't have any adjustment in the standard suspension. There's no rebound clicker or compression adjuster on the fork, so you can't make it move quicker without changing the oil and changing the spring. But when you do change those things, you then still don't have any control over what they do. You put a progressive spring in it and you might stiffen it up a bit at the bottom, but then you have the potential for the rebound to work too quickly. You compensate by that by changing oils, and you kind of end up chasing yourself down a hole, which I don't think you're going to solve particularly well. And the more I rode the V-Strom, the more I came to the conclusion that it doesn't need solving. You see, with the V-Strom, when you ride it at relatively sensible speeds within the limit of what the whole bike is capable of, it works just fine. It works perfectly well on gravel roads, and if it gets a bit more technical and a bit rockier, you can slow down a little bit. If you change the suspension, you then run into the next problem, and you're going to end up breaking the bike. For the net gain that you would get from improving the suspension by spending a lot of time fettling and testing it, or taking it down a path where you try to transform it into something else by swapping out the forks for another bike's forks, or going through the process of buying a new shock, I don't think you're going to gain what you want to gain, and you're going to spend a lot of money that I think I would rather spend on tires, fuel, and going exploring. After all, that's the point of making this bike a little bit more capable than it was. So at the end of this project, a few things have become really clear. Firstly, I think the V-Strom is a fantastic bike. It's got a few characteristics that make it a really nice all-road style bike, and the main one of those is the engine. The engine is really, really easy to use. It's got great torque down low. It makes a really gentle contact with the ground, so it's easy to keep rear wheel grip. And the way the bike delivers power makes it easy to ride in tricky situations. So when you get stuck somewhere, you're in a position you need to turn around or do a hill start somewhere, it's a bike that really looks after you. It surprised me what I could get it to do off-road because of this as well. As I said before, this is a bike with a limit. It's limited by suspension, by its chassis geometry, and by its incredibly low sump. But if you respect what it's used for, what it's capable of doing, you're really going to enjoy it. If you want something more off-road capable, you want something that you can push into much more challenging situations, there's a ton of other bikes out there that are better suited for the task at hand. But if you want a nice street bike, you can take down some gravel roads and explore a bit more than you did before, the V-Strom's a winner. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a fantastic video to make, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to all the companies that have helped make this video possible. They stepped up to help us finish this project when our original bike got stolen, and if you want to check out those products and see the products we used from those companies, you can find all the links to the products in the description of this video. We also released some new merchandise a couple of weeks ago that's designed to be really, really nice to just wear as everyday clothing. If you're new to this channel, hit the subscribe button. We've got some really cool new videos coming out soon. Thanks for watching, and remember, life's better when you're riding.